In my last video, I talked about our life plan. And what I did in that video was to give you sort of the positive, uplifting aspect of a life plan. But I knew, of course, from experience that this isn't the full story. There are certainly many questions you can ask about have we chosen these very difficult situations where we are abused, we are killed, we are exposed to all kinds of atrocities on this planet. And so I thought I would do another one where I kind of look at the harder questions, more difficult questions. And so let's first make a distinction. It's not my intention with the videos I'm doing to reach everybody, to address the situation of all people. Because I've been on the spiritual path for a long time and I realized that this is simply impossible. When I was young and naive, now I'm not young anymore, I thought that it would be possible to reach everybody with a spiritual teaching. But I realized it just isn't. And the reason for this is, as I've explained in several videos, that there are levels of human consciousness. And that the base level is the 48th level of consciousness, where we have an intuitive sense we are connected to something outside our own minds, which is basically our higher selves and our spiritual teachers. But we can also make the choice to go below the 48th level of consciousness, which means we go into the levels of separation. The levels of consciousness where we don't see ourselves as connected beings, we see ourselves as separate beings. And so I've also said that planet Earth can be compared to a schoolroom, and there are two basic ways we can learn. We can learn by being connected beings, which means we are open to receiving some kind of help, some kind of teaching, some kind of directions from outside our own minds. Or we can learn in the school of separation, which I've also called the school of hard knocks, where we're not open to receiving this kind of input. So we can also basically say that as long as you are seeing yourself as a connected being, you are open to the very fact that everything on earth, everything in your situation is related to your psychology, to your state of consciousness, your state of mind. As I've said, the earth can be seen as a reality simulator. Whatever we are projecting out is what the simulator will reflect back to us, or the cosmic mirror will reflect back. This is basically what has been stated in most religions which contain the teaching, do unto others what you want them to do unto you. Because what you do unto others is what you are projecting into the cosmic mirror, and you are basically saying to the mirror, this is what I want to receive back. So we can say that there are two levels of consciousness, two main levels of consciousness on Earth. There's the sense of being connected, there's the sense of being separated. And for people who are in the state of separation, they can find an outer spiritual teaching. They might also make some use of it, like many people have taken, for example, the Christian teaching about doing unto others, and they have used that to reform their behavior. So that means they can gradually climb back up to the 48th level where they can again see themselves as connected beings. But basically when people go below the 48th level of consciousness, they are not really open to receiving direct input from outside themselves, which means what? It means they can't make a life plan. Before they come into this embodiment, they couldn't make a life plan because they weren't open to working with the Ascended Masters and get direction on what would be beneficial for them in their next lifetime. So we can say that these people are basically, they're placing themselves outside of this relationship with the Ascended Masters that we have above the 48th level. I mean, I know many people above the 48th level are not aware of Ascended Masters, but you're still in between embodiments. You still have a relationship with them where you're working with them to plan your next embodiment. So when you're below the 48th level, you can't really do that, which means that people below that level, they don't have a life plan. So therefore, we have to look at these people and we can ask the question, did they choose to put themselves in a situation where they were sexually abused, physically abused, killed, put into slavery, torture, or whatever they experience? And the answer is no, they didn't. They didn't choose this, at least not directly, not in between lifetimes. They chose it indirectly in the sense that the choices they have made have put them in their present level of consciousness. And so, as I explained in one of my How the World Works videos about where we have the potential to go, your present level of consciousness determines where you go in between embodiments. And some people go to a very low level where they have conflict after conflict with other people who are at the same level of consciousness. And if they don't learn in between embodiments, if they don't change their consciousness, they come back into their next lifetime pretty much at the same level. They're going to be embodied in a situation with other people who are at that level of consciousness. And that's why they can be exposed to all kinds of abuse, violence, whatever you have. It's just a matter of, the consciousness of the person determines the environment in which the person is born and the potential for what can happen in that environment. And so this is the school of hard knocks. There is no life plan. There is no direct, I'm choosing to be born into this particular circumstance in order to learn a lesson. It's just not there. So we can look at many people on earth and we can see this. They haven't chosen their circumstances, which is often why they react by seeing themselves as victims and not considering what could I learn from this situation. And that's why they repeat over and over and over again from lifetime to lifetime. And you see many, many people on earth who are born into a group of people where they are in conflict with another group of people, and they just continue this lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. There are places on earth where this has been going on for thousands of years. Nobody can even remember how it started. So what I'm trying to address in these videos is people who are above the 48th level, who are open to receiving input, at least in between embodiments, and who are therefore working with the Ascended Masters, choosing within limits their next embodiment. And so the first thing we need to recognize here is that the fact that you reach the 48th level of consciousness doesn't mean you don't have karma anymore. You obviously can have karma from past lives. So the karma determines what options you have for choosing your next embodiment. So when a person chose their present embodiment, they may have had, because of their past karma, limited options. You could embody maybe one place or another place, maybe 3 places, 4 places, but there were limited options because of the karma you had, which tends to make you gravitate into particular situations. So when you then rise higher above the 48th level, you usually gain more and more options. And this can mean that you have the option to choose an easy lifetime, where you are born in a country that has stability, some freedom. You're born in a family that isn't abusive. Your parents don't get divorced. You're not born in poverty. You're not exposed to violence, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, all these kind of things. So you can indeed choose this. And of course, many people do, because a lifetime like that is a great opportunity to heal your wounds, to heal the traumas you received in past lifetimes. And also just to heal, to rest, to have a not so intense lifetime. It can also be a great opportunity, of course, to find a spiritual teaching and focus on that spiritual teaching. But I've been on a spiritual path for many years, and I have met, of course, thousands of spiritual people, and many of them did not choose to have an easy lifetime. And so what is the reason for that? Well, there can be quite a number of different reasons, because when you look at Earth, it's a very complex scenario you have on this planet. Well, let's start with a simple one that I actually talk about in my previous video about your life plan. You want to learn something. You want to overcome something in your psychology. And so you can say, of course, why would I, as a spiritual person, if I had the option to choose an easier lifetime, why would I choose a very difficult one where I'm exposed to abuse? and it has a very negative impact on my sense of self-worth and my psychology. And now I'm basically, when I reach adulthood, I'm more or less shattered, and I have to pick up the pieces and start to make some kind of life for myself. Why would you choose a situation like that? Well, one possible reason is that many spiritual people have in past lifetimes, we have seen how violence begets violence. We have understood what these religions have said, do unto others, because what you do unto others reflects what you want others to do to you. So we have seen the folly of violence. This means we have gone into a state of mind where we are not aggressive. We are not the aggressors. We don't go out and abuse other people. We don't go out and kill other people. Obviously, when you're talking about just karma, you can say that if a person is abused in this lifetime, it could be because that person has abused others in a past lifetime. And that's often the case for people in the school of hard knocks. But for spiritual people, it's not that we have, perhaps many lifetimes ago, but certainly not in recent lifetimes, we haven't abused other people. So it's not karmically mandated that we need to experience what we have done to others. So why would we choose this? Well, as I said, once you go into this state where you're not an aggressive person, you can easily take this too far. Often what happens on a planet like Earth when there are such big contrasts is that we overcome one dualistic extreme, being aggressive, but then we swing to the opposite of being passive, being non-aggressive. We think that we have to allow other people to do whatever they want to do to us because we can't object. And so for many spiritual people, this has led us into a situation where we haven't done what psychologists call having boundaries, defining boundaries for ourselves, what we will allow to happen to us and what we won't. So we could have had, spiritual person could have had several lifetimes where you haven't had proper boundaries. And now you're looking at this pattern, and perhaps you have been abused in several lifetimes because the abuse was your opportunity to define these boundaries. So now you look at this pattern, this trend, and you say, but I haven't defined these boundaries, and I see this is the major thing that's holding me back from going to a higher level of the spiritual path. I want to get over this. So I'm choosing to put myself in a situation where I'm likely to be abused, because this time I want to draw these boundaries. And so I know you can then take people who were abused as children, and you can say, well, obviously, if that was my goal, I failed. I completely failed because I didn't draw boundaries as a child. And you can also go in and say, well, how could I have? I was just a child. And that's understandable. I understand that reaction. But I know people who were severely abused as children and who also couldn't draw the boundaries when they were children, but as adults they have. So in other words, when you choose a lifetime like this, where you're almost, like I said in my previous video, you're forcing yourself to confront a certain issue in your psychology, it's not necessarily the intent here that you should learn that lesson as a child and say no as a child. The intent is that you learn the lesson in this lifetime. And that often means that you have to wait to adulthood before you are able to learn that lesson. So the question is, what do you want to do now with the rest of your life? Do you want to learn the lesson and move on to a higher level of your divine plan, your life plan? Or do you want to not? I know this can be harsh, but this is a choice we all have, whether we were exposed to abuse or not. We all have hang-ups in our psychology. We all have points on the spiritual path where we have this, what in the US they call a hitting the concrete experience. You hit your head against the concrete wall and you realize the wall isn't going to give. So you're going to have to give. And I've had many of these experiences myself. So what we can do at this point is we can realize that when we're exposed to abuse, in order to survive it psychologically, we create a separate self, a subconscious self. We usually create more than one. But we create these cells in order to somehow psychologically survive. And there is certainly at least one self that says, but I couldn't have done anything differently. I was just a child. I was the victim. And it's very understandable that you have this self, right? It's very understandable. Nothing wrong with it. What else can we do? But what you can do as an adult looking back, you can say, okay, I understand now that I had to create this self in order to survive as a child. But do I have to carry that self with me the rest of my life? Is it constructive to carry that? Will it help me feel better to carry this self? Or will it block me from reaching the goal I wanted to reach in this lifetime? And that's then, if you decide, I don't want to carry this with me, then I have in some of my other videos talked about the tools, how you can overcome this. Because it is just the self. The self will, of course, resist you making that decision. Because the self wants to survive. And it can only survive if it keeps you in that state of mind where you have disempowered yourself and said, oh, nothing I can do about this. Because I can't change what happened. But you can't change what happened, as I said, but you can change how it affected you. You can change the cells that you created as a result of what happened. You can let them die. So this is the choice you have. It's not a matter of saying, looking back with regrets and say, oh, I should have learned that lesson when I was a child and I should have defended myself. No, but you can do it now. It's a matter of doing it now and not letting it define the rest of your life. Okay, so I realize this is not very empathetic, not very sensitive, but it's the reality. I know people who have done this. They have come to this point where they have said, okay, I'm not going to be a victim the rest of my life. What can I do? And in that case, there's a lot of teachings. There are spiritual teachings. There are psychological teachings that can help you. If you haven't made that decision, nothing can really help you. I'm sorry to say. Not even the greatest amount of sympathy and empathy is going to help you. So this is one possible scenario, as I said. You actually chose to put yourself in an abusive situation or another difficult situation in order to draw these boundaries and say, this I will not allow other people to do to me. And I know you can always continue to ask questions, right? You can say, but what if you are raped as an adult? What if you are killed? What if somebody uses violence against you? Did I choose this? And again, there could be karmic reasons for bad things happening to good people. I mean, this is one of the perennial questions. You can go back into time. In fact, many years ago, there was a book written called Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People? And religious people have been struggling for this for thousands of years. Why does God allow this to happen to people? But as I've tried to explain here, God doesn't allow it to happen. It's the outplaying of free will on a very dense planet like Earth. So there comes a point where you have to say there are two options for why things happen, why bad things happen to people who are good people. And one is, as I said, you could have chosen to put yourself in a situation where you had to learn to draw these boundaries. And there is a certain correspondence between your level of consciousness and what happens to you, what other people do to you. You can see that, let's take an extreme situation. Two soldiers who are both good people, have grown up together, have never really done anything bad. Two soldiers go to war. One is killed, the other isn't. Why? Well, one reason can be that the one person has reached a certain level on the spiritual path where he has overcome a certain level of consciousness. So this can't happen to him. The other person may not have done this, and that's why there's a vulnerability that these things can happen to that person. But there's also something we have to recognize on a planet like Earth, that when you are in physical embodiment on a planet like this, you're in a very, very vulnerable, difficult situation, because you see that there's so much chaos on Earth. There are people whose minds are completely taken over by dark forces. There's no logic, there's no rationality. They just want to destroy. And you simply cannot, even as a spiritual person, protect yourself against every possible thing that could happen, because there's no accounting for free will. So you see many people who have been drawn into, for example, war situations or other situations. So what I'm trying to say here is that as a spiritual person, my first reaction when something happens is to say, what was it in me that attracted this situation to me, or attracted me to that situation? Is it because there's something I need to learn? And this is kind of my default reaction. And I think many spiritual people, or certainly many I know, have that reaction. You're always looking at yourself. You're saying, why did this happen to me? What could I have done differently? What can I learn from it? How can I use it to grow? And it's a good reaction. It's a reasonable reaction. But we also have to come to a point where we recognize what kind of planet we are on. And we are recognizing that it isn't just a matter of our level of consciousness and our free will, because it's also a matter of other people's level of consciousness and their free will. And Earth is so chaotic that you can't really protect yourself against every possibility. I have actually, some time ago, I was inspired to write a book that I just want to recommend for people who are considering these kind of questions. And it's this one: My Lives with Lucifer, Satan, Hitler, and Jesus. Complicated title, I know, but it's a novel. It's fairly entertaining to read. And if you go on Amazon and look at the reviews, you will see that many people have found it was a life-changing experience to read the book, because it goes into this much more, the complexity of the situation on Earth. Now, let's go on to the next level. So as I've said, a lot of times if we are in difficult situations, it could be because we chose, because we wanted to learn something, and one of the things we often want to learn is to establish boundaries. But there are certain things that happen to us that are just an outplaying of the chaos on Earth. But there can actually be other reasons why we choose to put ourselves in a very difficult situation as spiritual people. And one reason can be that we have overcome a certain tendency in our consciousness. Let's say, for example, you overcame this unwillingness to define boundaries, and you defined proper boundaries for yourself. And you have now had several lifetimes where you weren't abused. But now you have come to a higher level of the spiritual path, and you are saying to yourself, have I really overcome this? I want to make sure I've overcome it, so I want to actually have a lifetime where I confront the possibility that I could be abused, to make sure that I would react in the best possible way. It's kind of like in one of my previous videos, I talk about how I had, as a child, I had this fear of skeletons, and I ended up letting myself be locked into a dark room with a skeleton in order to confront my fear. So it could be a similar thing that happens to us. We not necessarily confronting the fear, but we want to say, I want to demonstrate to myself that I really have overcome this, because I'm not 100% sure. So you choose to be born in a lifetime where there's no karmic reason you have to do it, other than you want to see how you can do it. And perhaps you even are abused as a child, but you have a higher way of dealing with it, and that's why it's easier for you to overcome it. And so this is one scenario. But there are other scenarios. And what happens to us, and this is actually what's described in this book, is that what I just described in the book is that there are certain beings on Earth that have gone very, very deep into this duality consciousness, the consciousness of separation. And I talk about this also in some of my How the World Works videos, where these beings who have fallen in previous spheres, they have really gone very deeply into this consciousness of separation. So they have no empathy, they have no concerns for what they do to other people. And what the book about my lives describes is how sometimes we who are spiritual people can become involved with these fallen beings. I describe how there are many people who came from natural planets to Earth to hold a spiritual balance when the fallen beings were allowed to embody here. I'm not going to go into this in this video because I have described it. Take the first one of my How the World Works videos, and it describes this process. So many times what happens is that we who are spiritual people, we have in past lifetimes been involved with these people who are very selfish, very self-centered. And we actually sometimes choose, even in this lifetime, to embody again with these people, and there can be two reasons for it. One is that we can give these people an opportunity. We can give them an opportunity to not do in this lifetime what they have done to us or other people in a past lifetime. In other words, we can become born as a child to one of these parents who are in this low level of consciousness, and we are obviously, they have an opportunity to abuse us because we are their children, but we're hoping that this time they won't do it, so that they will then start an upward trend. They will start getting over that low level of consciousness. Sounds very complicated, and it is. But when you think about it, several spiritual people I have met have done precisely this. And of course, when you put yourself in a situation like this, there's no guarantee that you're going to be abused. It's a possibility, but it's not a guarantee. But you do this because you are saying, well, I know I can overcome this. I reached this level of spiritual maturity where I can deal with this. I can overcome this and still make something out of the rest of my lifetime after I become an adult. Now, what happens then if you put yourself in this situation and the person does abuse you? Sexually, psychologically, emotionally, whatever. Well, what happens is that there is something called the judgment of Christ. And this is what happens when one of these very self-centered life streams, when they abuse a person at a higher level of consciousness. In other words, I've talked about karmic connections, right? So let's take that. Here's a person who in several past lifetimes have abused children. And the person is now embodying as the child of another person who in past lifetimes has abused children. And the person is abused. In that case, the karma that the abuser incurs is not as severe because, these people are in the same level of consciousness. If the roles had been reversed, well, then the child would have abused who is now the parent, and so forth. But when one of these selfish life streams abuses a person who has risen to a higher level of consciousness, this brings a certain judgment of Christ upon the abuser. And one outcome of this is that the person then is no longer allowed to be in physical embodiment on Earth. It can go to a lower realm, which is like what some people have seen as hell, or it can go to another planet. This is also described in the My Lives book. So there are spiritual people who have reached a fairly high level of consciousness, sometimes even above the 96th level, where they have chosen to put themselves in an embodiment where they are subject to abuse from one of these self-centered life streams. And this is a realistic possibility for many spiritual people. And so what can you do with this? Well, you can realize that you did it for a specific purpose. You now have the opportunity to, first of all, heal yourself from this, which you can do because you have had a higher level of consciousness to begin with. But you can also deliberately make the calls to the Ascended Masters for the judgment of the person who abused you and, of course, all other people as well. All people who are abused, they have the opportunity to say, how can I help the progression of humankind? How can I turn this into something I'm helping other people with? And you can do this by realizing that you can make calls to the Ascended Masters to basically consume the consciousness, these collective beasts in the collective consciousness that are causing all of this abuse. You can say that many people who are abusing children, for example, they are not all these very low life streams. In some cases, their minds are just taken over by these collective entities that want to steal people's energy. So you get people to abuse others, and there's energy released that these beings can steal. And so there are literally people, and of course they allow this to happen, so they are in a low state of consciousness, but they are not in the lowest state of consciousness as these fallen beings I've talked about. Basically, you can see that so many things that are done on Earth are done because people's minds are taken over by these collective entities. Any form of addiction, for example, people's minds are taken over by these collective entities that want to steal their energy. So you can certainly turn it into, you make the calls for this to happen. And so when you start contemplating this and start asking for help to see this from your higher self and from the Ascended Masters who are your spiritual teachers, you can gradually come to greater and greater clarity about this. And this can actually help you really see why you chose this. And you can actually come to see, was there really anything I wanted to learn from this? Is there something I need to learn from this? Or have I learned the lesson in past lives and now I just need to move beyond it? I just need to move beyond it and start looking at what are the creative aspects of my life plan, because certainly putting yourself in an abusive situation, that wasn't the ultimate aspect of your life plan. You also had a positive aspect, what you want to do. So what do you possibly want to do by choosing to put yourself in an abusive situation? Well, ask yourself this: how does humankind progress? Why do we, at least in many countries in the world, why do people have a better situation today than they had 200 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago? Why do we have countries where people are not subject, they are not the slaves of a dictator or a small power elite, but they have greater freedom? Why do we have this? Well, it's simply because there have always been some people who are forerunners for bringing change. I mentioned before how did democracy come into being? Because there were some people that locked into this idea that all human beings have rights, that they are given by a higher authority, and that no government on earth has the right to violate people's rights. So look at again, what is an important aspect of the growth of humankind? What is, in a sense, the essential aspect of the growth of humankind? It's the growth in consciousness, the raising of awareness, the healing of psychology, people overcoming their psychological wounds. This is the essence of growth. We may look at all kinds, and of course I was brought up the same way that you probably were, to look at history as there are these outer factors that drive history, and there are these important people in the elite who drive history and the development of society. But this is all just superficial. What really drives history and the growth in society is the raising of the collective consciousness. And how is the collective consciousness raised? By individuals raising their individual level of consciousness. And how do they do this? By looking at themselves, looking at the patterns they have in their psychology, the reactionary patterns, deciding to overcome them. So you look at today's world. In many of the modern democracies where people have greater freedom, many more people are beginning to focus on their psychology, developing themselves. I talked about before Abraham Maslow's pyramid of human needs, where the top of the pyramid is the self-actualization needs. Many more people are moving into these needs. And so, what are we here for as spiritual people? Well, one of the reasons we are here is to help other people log into the spiritual path and start raising their consciousness, healing their psychology. But how do we do this? Well, we can do it by teaching, but we also do it by example. One of the primary ways that we do things is by example. So, there are many spiritual people, many spiritual people, who, when you are making your life plan, you are saying, what is the area of society, what is the area of human psychology that I feel strongly about, where I really would like to make a contribution? And then you're looking at a particular area, and it could be, for example, you see that many people are traumatized. Their lives in childhood get put on a track, and they can't free themselves from it. So what do you say to yourself? You say, I want to put myself in a very difficult childhood, and I want to demonstrate that I can overcome it. I want to demonstrate by example that we can overcome a difficult childhood, whether it's abusive, sexually, verbally, emotionally, in other ways. And there are many spiritual people that have deliberately put themselves in that situation. And again, you can go back and say, yeah, but I didn't learn my lesson in childhood, and here I am, I'm now an adult, and I haven't overcome my childhood trauma. And I would say, yes, you haven't overcome your childhood trauma yet. But it's never too late. You came here to demonstrate that you can overcome it. So anytime you decide to overcome it, it sets a powerful example. There's no reason to have any regrets. There's no reason to look back and say, oh, it should have happened a long time ago. No. It should happen when you decide it's going to happen. And if that's now, what's wrong with that? This is your example. This is your life. This is how you demonstrate it. There's guaranteed to be other people out there who are struggling with the same kind of background that you have been struggling with, who are struggling with the same psychological issues that you have been struggling with, and that have prevented you from overcoming the trauma up until this point. So by you deciding from now on, this is my opportunity, this is what I wanted to do, you will set a powerful example. And the tools are there. There are teachings in general psychology. There are many different spiritual teachings. Certainly, many spiritual teachings have been brought forth through me. I mentioned this book, My Lives. There's 4 other books that come after this one in the same series that are specifically designed to help you heal your spiritual traumas and make peace with being on earth. And I know people who have used them. It's been very powerful to them. It was very powerful for me to receive these teachings and to use these teachings and help me break through to a whole other level on my spiritual path. And I think it can be for many other people. So perhaps this is what you've been looking for. Perhaps this is what you've been missing, the one ingredient that can help you say, okay, doesn't matter what happened up until this point. Doesn't matter what I did or didn't do. The only thing that matters is, what will I do from now on, and how can I fulfill my life plan by setting the example that I wanted to set. There's no right or wrong example here. Look at people. There are all kinds of different situations, all kinds of different backgrounds, all kinds of psychological issues. Whatever you have experienced, there are many other people that have experienced something similar, that are struggling with the same thing. And by you overcoming it, you can set a powerful example for them. The Ascended Masters actually teach that the higher you go on this path of the 144 levels of consciousness, the more people are below you. It's like when you reach a certain level, you are like the tip of the pyramid. And there is a pyramid of people below you that you are pulling up when you are raising yourself. So by you overcoming something, by you going through something in your psychology, you are setting an example that can help all of these people below you say, oh, but if that person can do it, why can't I do it? And this is one of the really powerful, basic realizations that the Ascended Masters are giving us. And it's simply this saying, what one has done, all can do. If you overcome a particular issue in your psychology, those who are below you in your pyramid can do the same thing. And it will be easier for them because you have done it. It's kind of like, the first person walking through a jungle is struggling with all kinds of plants and has to use a machete to chop this down. But the next person can follow your trail and it's easier. And when the more people follow the trail, the broader it becomes, the easier it becomes to follow. So many of us who are spiritual people, we chose to come into this lifetime to be the trailblazers, to blaze a trail in the collective consciousness and say, you can overcome this psychological issue. You can overcome a difficult childhood. You can overcome basically anything in human psychology. You're not here necessarily to show them they can overcome anything, but you can overcome this particular issue. Why can you say this? Because you've done it. And what one has done, all can do. So I hope this gives you a broader, deeper perspective on your life plan and why you might have chosen the situation that you found yourself in as a child. What it leads to and what the potential is and how you can move forward from this point.